Hey everyone, I've got two computers. One of them is on AM4 and the other is on AM5, and recently I've been doing quite a lot of different tests to actually see which is better. And we all know that AM5 is better in absolute terms, but actually I've come to the conclusion that if you're upgrading your computer or even doing a brand new build and you're on a budget, it might make sense to stay with AM4, which seems counterintuitive considering AM5 is technically better. But in this video I wanted to speak about why you might actually want to stick with the 9-year-old AM4 platform. And I can't believe it's 9 years old, but there we are. So the first reason that you might want to stay is that AM4 offers a lot more bang for your buck, because in many cases the CPU and the RAM is half the price that it is with AM5 when you compare the equivalent ones. And you might even be able to get like an X3D chip like the 5700X3D or the 5800X3D for cheaper than a normal CPU like the 7500F or the 7600. And yes, I know that those AM5 CPUs I just mentioned tend to perform better or equal to the X3D chips on the AM4 platform, but when you get down to the price of it, it could actually make sense to stay with AM4. And that's because, especially if you dip into the used market, you can often get like a 5700X3D for less than £200 or $200, whereas something like the 7800X3D is over £400. So you're looking at a substantial saving. You're certainly not going to get like 2 or 3 times better gaming performance, by going for that AM5 CPU. And then you come to the motherboards, and actually they are quite cheap now on AM5. There was a time when they were really expensive, but you can often get a half decent B650 motherboard for less than $100 or £100, but you can still get them a lot cheaper on AM4. If you're buying brand new, they might only be £10 or £20 cheaper on average, but if you jump into the used market, you can get some absolute bargains. And I recently bought an X570 MSI Tomahawk motherboard for like £75, and brand new that was like over £200, and really it was pristine. It had the box, it had all the accessories and the anti-static bag and everything else, so it was a really good deal. And that's the thing with AM4, because people are starting to upgrade to AM5, what you can find on the used market especially is that actually there's a lot of choice out there. And that's why I think that if you're on a budget, AM4 can make really good sense, because as long as you're careful and you look for a seller that clearly has took good care of their hardware and maybe has the original boxes and things like that, you can get some really good deals on the used market. And next up we come to the RAM, and this is yet another area where AM4 just reigns supreme really, because DDR5 RAM, while it has come down in price quite a lot, it is still quite expensive. But when you come to DDR4, it's surprising just how cheap it can be. I mean, you're looking at under £50 or $50. That's actually the brand new price as well. If you were to jump into the used market, you can get it for even cheaper, and some people have gone for like 64 gigs and actually got that cheaper with DDR4, got that cheaper than with 32 gigs of DDR5. So if you're doing especially professional workloads and things like that, I think AM4 can be a really good deal, because otherwise if you're looking at 64 gigs of DDR5 RAM, that can be really expensive, and often you have to buy that brand new because you don't get that as much on the used market. But actually it depends how you actually purchase things, because if you go on PC Part Picker and you actually come up with a basic CPU, RAM and motherboard bundle, what you sometimes might find is that actually you're not paying that much less for an AM4 based system compared to an AM5 based system. So then you might be wondering what the heck I'm actually talking about in this video. But that's why I keep going on about the used market, because AM4 is obviously 9 years old and AMD and the board partners are actually mainly focusing on AM5. You're not going to get as much brand new stock, and so weirdly if you're looking at brand new pricing, you might actually be better off with AM5. Yes, you might pay slightly more on a like-for-like basis than with AM4, but then you've got more future-proofing options and a better set of hardware. But if you are willing to jump into the used market, you can often get a RAM, CPU and motherboard bundle for like a third of the price that you pay for a brand new DDR5 AM5 based build. And yes, okay, I'm comparing a used system that might be 5 or 6 years old compared to a brand new one. Obviously, if you've got unlimited money, then just buy AM5 and be happy with that. But for the rest of us, AM4 can make sense, especially if you're more interested in, an office computer or workstation computer or something like that. I think that's where AM4 does particularly well. And next we come to gaming performance, because this is one area where AM4 still does pretty well, but AM5 does have the edge, sort of. So recently I actually upgraded from my RX 6700 XT graphics card to a 5800 RTX NVIDIA graphics card. And what I did as part of that upgrade is actually run lots of benchmarks and actually seen whether they run better on AM4 or AM5. And actually in reality, both graphics cards run pretty much the same on both systems, on AM4 versus AM5. The main change was that you've seen 1% lows and minimum FPS rates were slightly better on AM5, but actually the average FPS rate was completely the same. same for both my AMD graphics card and also my NVIDIA graphics card, which kind of surprised me at first, but it does kind of make sense because especially if you're doing 1440p or 4K gaming, the actual graphics card is going to be the main sort of bottleneck you're going to have, especially at 4K, than the actual CPU and the rest of the system. And yes, getting like a 9800X3D is going to give you the best possible gaming performance, of course, but you know, if you are looking at 4K gaming especially, then actually the graphics card matters probably more than the CPU and the RAM and the rest of the bundle really. But actually if you game at lower resolutions, then you probably will see a benefit with going with AM5. So even if you're on a budget, if you want to do like 1080p gaming or maybe 1440p gaming at a standard resolution, not a widescreen, you might actually find that you want to, you know, spend a little bit extra and try and get on AM5. And that's because if you compare something like the 5700X3D to a 7600X CPU, so one on AM4 and one on AM5, what you will probably notice is that the 7600X tends to have slightly better gaming performance than the 5700X3D. Even though that's an X3D chip, really you're looking at a lower base clock on it, so even though it's got that extra cache and things like that, the 7600X does tend to outperform it in many cases. But as I said, when you then get to 4K gaming, if that's what you wanted to game on, that difference kind of disappears a little bit, because while the CPU and the RAM does matter, the GPU is the main issue there, and that's what I seen because I was gaming at 4K. You know, both my AMD and NVIDIA graphics cards performed pretty much exactly the same on both AM4 and AM5. So it's kind of hard for me to say, you know, you definitely need to go with AM4 or AM5, because ultimately everyone's circumstances are different and the actual factors that make up gaming performance can vary a lot too. But in general, if you had an AM4 based build with a 5700X3D or 5800X3D, you're gonna have a really good gaming experience, whether you game at 1080p or 4K or anything in between. And I know people talk about AM4 being a dead platform and, you know, you don't have as much future-proofing options, and that sort of is true, but actually I don't really believe in future-proofing as much really. I think that's a bit of a non-argument. Because, for example, I've got a B650 motherboard, which is on AM5, but that has a PCI Express Gen 4 slot. And actually, I now have a Gen 5, a PCI Express Gen 5 graphics card in the RTX 5080, and actually, I'm now considering changing my motherboard. So, you know, even though I was future-proofing by buying an AM5-based motherboard, I kind of didn't future-proof either, because there's always going to be a latest and greatest thing to give you FOMO and everything else. So I think sometimes, again, you just need to sit down, look at what the best deals are when you're actually going to purchase things, and just commit to that and try and be happy, you know, because you can also have future-proofing options on AM4. Like if you've got 2666 megahertz of RAM, you can always upgrade that to like 3200 megahertz or 3600 megahertz, and that will lead to better gaming performance, as this video from Odin Hardware shows, because you will get a bit of a gaming bump by actually increasing the RAM frequency. So that is one thing you can actually do to future-proof yourself, or at least, you know, invest in the AM4 ecosystem. And obviously, if you are hitting against performance limits, you can always explore overclocking for even more of a boost, and this video from Frame Chasers actually shows this off a lot and shows what sort of FPS rates increase you can actually expect in many cases. And obviously for some games you don't really see much benefit at all from overclocking, but in other games it does perform quite nicely. And I like that with the Frame Chasers video, at the end it actually shows whether you should consider upgrading your AM4 based CPU or not. So I've put that chart on the screen now. It is worth looking at that, because again, this comes back to the point that, you know, you can be on AM4 and be perfectly happy and still have also room to actually upgrade your system in the future. But obviously if you do have unlimited money, it would be a no-brainer to go with AM5. You're going to get a better experience with that. But obviously for the rest of us, going with AM4 can make perfect sense. And as I mentioned, I've got my two systems, one with a 5900X, so the AM4 platform, and one with a 7600, so my AM5 based platform. And actually they both perform pretty much the same when it comes to gaming. And now that I've switched to an NVIDIA graphics card, they also perform the same when it comes to video editing too, because, you know, the graphics card's actually doing the hard work. So even if you're doing professional workloads more than gaming, you might find that buying an Intel or NVIDIA graphics card might work out better for you than upgrading from, you know, an AM4 to AM5 CPU, because often the Intel and NVIDIA graphics cards actually support professional workloads better. And in that case, you know, they matter then more than the CPU does. So that is worth knowing. And overall, I hope this video gave you some food for thought, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click the thumbs up button, and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.